Hello, hello everyone. Welcome to the free GMAT Prep Hour. So excited to have everyone here with us. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So this is an hour where we discuss different topics about the GMAT, about things that you can do to prepare. This is meant to be purely informational, but feel free to ask questions at any time if you are participating live. If you're watching this on recording later, know that you can attend one of our free GMAT prep hours every 2 weeks. They're always free, and you can also go to our YouTube channel to see previous episodes, previous installments. And so let's get started here. It is an unbelievably cold evening here in New York City. I don't know where you guys are in the world. I know that folks across the US are quite cold today. So feel free to use the chat window and tell me where you're dialing in from. Type in the chat, where is everyone calling in from today? Maryland, that's where I'm from. Philly, pretty cold there too. Ooh, Tennessee is supposed to be freezing, right? Can't find your chat window, go to the Zoom menu bar and you can click on chat. Yeah, it is rough out there on this January 31st, hitting the polar vortex. National Hot Chocolate Day. Ooh, that sounds fun. I love that. All right, folks, here is what we're getting into. This is probably the topic that you guys are all most interested in when it comes to GMAT studying. We're going to talk about the formula for getting a 700. Yep, that's it. I'm going to tell you exactly how to get a 700. More or less. It's not that simple, but what does it actually take to get a 700? What does it take to get a 730? What does it even take to get a 760? We're going to talk about why percentiles lie to you, why you might not know what you think you know about your score. And then, in line with how to get a 700 or above, we're going to think like a GMAT master. What do 700 plus students do that other students don't? And then we're going to look at what not to solve. So, formula for a 700. Does anyone know? Now, this is a very open-ended question. Does anyone know what it takes to get a 700? Not a trick question, I mean a numerical formula. If we think about the breakdown of the scores that could get you a 700, what you need is roughly 85 or 86 points total. So that could mean a 46 on quant and a 40 on verbal, or pretty much any combination of scores that adds up to a 700. So it could be higher on quant, higher on verbal, you get the idea. To get a 730, well, picture that moving up this chart here, you need about 90 to 92 subscore points total. So that could be a 48 quant with a 42 verbal. If you want a 760, I'm sure there are those of you out there aiming for those top scores. You can come work for Manhattan Prep with those scores. 49 quant and 46 verbal. I also love, somebody typed in the chat window, the way to get a 700 is basically no errors on the easier questions. And that's roughly true. We're going to look a little bit later at how the scoring works. But essentially, to get that 49 on quant, you would need to be getting most of the questions up to that level correct. But before we get into that specifically, tell me this, for those of you who are here, type in the chat window, which topic is your weakness, quant or verbal? We'll be open, we'll share with everyone here. When I ask people this question, most people tell me Quant, although I'm getting a lot of folks in here saying that verbal is the weak area. When people tell me that quant is their weak area, what I say is, I'm not so sure. That might not be accurate. Because if we think about it in terms of percentiles, your quant percentile might look a lot lower, but your verbal score itself might actually be lower. So a lot of people just over-focus on the quant and ignore the verbal entirely, but it is impossible to hit a 730 without getting at least a 38 on verbal, and that's with a perfect quant score. Most people, if you're aiming for a 700 plus score, you want to be aiming for a 40 on verbal. And if you look at the scores that you currently have on practice tests, you might actually be further away from your goal sub-score on verbal than on quant. So you can't ignore either section. Whatever your weakness is, yeah, focus on that, but make sure that you're focusing on what you consider your strengths as well. Business schools pretty much care about your overall score above all. That said, it is generally true that top schools, and I know a lot of you guys are aiming for top 15 or even top 10 programs, they'd be looking for a quant score that's probably a 45 or above, and a verbal that's 35, 36 or above. But, you know, give or take. More than anything else, they're concerned about your overall score. If you're concerned that your quant score is a little bit lower, but your overall score is decent, let's say, for example, if you were on the end of the spectrum where, here I'm going to do a little spotlight here. Let's say that you were getting something in the range of, let's say, a 40 on quant, but you maxed out your verbal. You could get that 730, but worry that schools would see a low quant score. That might be a liability. But if you have other proof of quantitative ability, if you took quantitative classes in undergrad, if your current job demonstrates quantitative capacity, it might not be as much of a problem if quant is a little bit lower than verbal, as long as you have that overall score that really wows them. Remember, in general, when you're looking at schools that you're applying to, aim to be at or above the median score. So for top schools right now, a lot of top 10 schools, you want to aim to be at or above their median or average, which is typically 720. So top 10 schools, aim for a 720 plus, but that's just the average. Think about it this way. An average means half the students who get admitted get a lower score than that. So it's always best to aim for that, but don't think that you don't have a chance if you don't hit that score. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the kind of quant and verbal score combinations that would add up to the 700 plus. But you might be saying to me, well, what about percentiles, right? What about percentiles? Have any of you guys heard the old myth that you should aim for 80th percentile on both sections? Hopefully that myth has died, but I feel like it might still be floating out there somewhere. There's still folks who say like, oh, aim to be 80th percentile quant and 80th percentile verbal. Well, here's why that is a big myth that needs to be dispelled. This is what the percentiles look like back in August of 2006. Not that long ago. I mean, maybe long ago for some of you guys, but all things considered, not a million years ago. If you got a score of 45 on the quant, that's kind of the threshold that top schools say, wow, this person has a pretty impressive quantitative abilities. That was a 78th percentile, pretty close to 80th percentile. Impressive score, right? Any guesses about what subscore of 45 on Quant would be today in terms of percentiles? As of January 2019, any guesses? Oh no, the percentiles go in the opposite direction. A 45 on Quant is only 55th percentile. That is a staggering number to me. A 45 on Quant is really hard to get. And almost half, 45% of test takers get above that. That's bananas. Quite frankly, that is just shocking, the kind of like arms race of studying that people go through. The better other people do, the better you have to do, so the better everyone else does. And there's this competitive pressure to get higher and higher and higher and higher Quant scores. And at a certain point, schools know, look, a 45 represents exactly the same ability level in 2019 that it represented in 2006. So if back in 2006 we were accepting lots of people with 45s, we're still going to accept lots of people with 45s. It's just as difficult to get. It's just that the culture is that people are prepping more and more, and so more people are getting those scores. If you were aiming to get 80th percentile, you would have to get on Quant 50 out of 51 possible. That's insane. 2 points away from perfect, a 49, nearly perfect on the Quant, is only 74th percentile. That's absolutely insane. That 25 plus % of test takers get that or above. So don't feel like you need to be in the top 2 points to be able to get into a top business school. That's absolutely not the case. Because look what's happened to the verbal percentiles on the other side. It used to be that, okay, 44, well, actually, this hasn't changed that much. The verbal percentile ranges haven't changed nearly as much as the Quant ones have. But in general, the skill level that it takes hasn't changed. So I want you, when you're thinking about scores that you're aiming for, to ignore your percentiles completely. Don't talk in terms of percentiles. Talk in terms of numerical score. What is your goal numerical score on the Quant, your goal numerical score on the verbal, and think in terms of adding up to 86 plus if you're aiming for the 700 plus score. Just a quick note on that as well. When we say, aim for 85 or 86, there is always some variation. There is such a thing as a high 45 and a low 45 because those are rounded numbers. So just keep that in mind, that there's some subtle variation that you won't see behind the scenes where there'll be rounding. But that's the idea. If you're overly focused on your Quant percentile and you ignore your verbal, there is no way to get that top score. So let's talk about the student who gets a 650, which is an impressive score, versus the student who gets the 730, which is the score that's going to wow top 10 schools. It's pretty hard to get a 650. That takes a lot of work. Somebody who gets a 650 has to know the content. You can't just kind of breeze in, get a 650 without learning what a rhombus is, right? But a student who gets a 730, the difference is they know strategy in addition to content. They're not just focusing on how do I solve every single question. They're thinking, what's the best way? What's the most efficient way to get the answer I want? Someone who gets a 650 has good test-taking instincts. They know how to avoid traps. They know how to avoid assumptions. But the student who gets a 730 goes beyond their instincts to mastery. And I'm especially talking here about things like sentence correction. For those of you who say, I can pretty much always tell when a sentence correction answer choice is wrong because it just sounds wrong. If you're just relying on your instincts there and you're not going to mastery, really knowing, all right, what's the difference between an adverbial modifier and a noun modifier? If you don't know that stuff, you might be doing pretty well at sentence correction, but you're never going to get to expert level where you're getting almost all of them right. To get a 650, you need to cover a lot of material, and you need to take several practice tests, call them CATs, computer adaptive tests. Yeah, you can't get that score without that. But if you want to push beyond that to get a 730, the difference is review. The difference between a student who gets a 650 versus a student who gets a 730 is not that the 730 student did a lot more problems. It's that the student who got the 700 plus reviewed them more. Really analyzed, okay, on this problem, what did I miss? What did I get wrong that I should apply to a different problem? What component pieces of this problem could be used in a different fashion? Like, could I imagine different iterations of this problem? Are there different ways I could have solved this problem? You should be spending more time doing than reviewing. Sorry, flip that around, got my words backwards. You should be spending more time reviewing than doing. And that feels a little counterintuitive, right? Your time is limited. And if you're like, okay, I only have an hour and a half to study tonight, I want to do an hour and a half's worth of problems. But you don't really gain much if you just do an hour and a half's worth of problems, but you don't review them. You want to spend about half an hour, maybe 40 minutes of that hour and a half doing new problems. And then the majority of that time, more than half your time, picking them apart, dissecting, analyzing, writing down your errors, redoing similar problems that you've done before, things like that. And yeah, the student who gets a 650 knows how to solve a lot of problems. But here's an important difference. A student who gets a 730 knows what not to solve. They're not going to do everything the algebraically correct way. They're even going to skip some problems. If you are stubborn, if you refuse to skip, you're not going to get a top score. This test is simply too hard. Even the people who get the 760 plus skip problems on the real test. I can assure you, I skip problems on the real test. So we're going to look at what not to solve in just a moment. But let's talk about the idea of reviewing first. How many of you out there keep a review log like this? Somewhere in an Excel spreadsheet, you keep a list of all the problems you've done, why you got them wrong, what you should have done. So someone's asking me in the chat, sometimes it takes an hour to review a problem. Is this common? Yeah, I think that's awesome. If you spend an hour really dissecting and saying, okay, how did they set it up this way? Why, why couldn't I have done it this other way? What else could I have done? I think that's great. And yeah, as you're saying, it can get tedious to spend that much time. But here's the difference. I would say that hour would be well spent if you're thinking, how can I extrapolate my learnings on this problem and apply them to other problems? If you're just spending an hour unpacking one really difficult, crazy difficult problem, but you're not really thinking about how to apply it to other things, that might not be a good use of your time. But if there's one difficult problem, but you attack it 3 different ways, and then you find 3 similar problems, and then you're recording your mistakes and you're making yourself flashcards, that actually is time really well spent, I think. So the idea is basically you want to make sure that if you've made a mistake once, you're not going to make the same mistake a second time. And all right, let's do an experiment. I want everyone to tell me in the chat window, what is the thing on Quant that you find hardest? I bet I can predict what some of these answers will be. Word problems, yeah, integer properties. I usually get a lot of people telling me probability, combinatorics, rate problems, things like that. There's, on the one hand, the problems that you find difficult, but then if I asked you, looking at your practice tests, what is the most common mistake you've made? That's actually the much more interesting question, and the question that's actually going to help you much more. Because what topic do you find the hardest? It's focusing on content. Um, and yeah, there are probability questions out there that are bananas hard and that really aren't worth your time. What you want to focus on is the basic fraction mechanics problem where you mixed up and forgot to flip and multiply and got it wrong because your mechanics were wrong. Or a word problem where you set it up correctly, did all the algebra correctly, but it was asking you for X and you solved for Y. Those are the kinds of mistakes that kill your score because those were gettable. Really, really, really hard probability question? Maybe it wasn't gettable. Who cares about the not gettable ones? The goal of keeping a detailed review log is to make sure that you don't make the same small, simple mistake more than once. So I want you to look out for the kinds of mistakes that we sort of sometimes brush off. You're like, I just said 2 plus 2 was 5. Well, that's dumb, but I know it. I know that content, so I don't need to worry about it. That is a big mistake. Those are the ones that you actually want to worry about way more than the really hard stuff. So I want you guys to look out especially for these common mistakes. Misreading the question, dropping negative signs, forgetting about key cases to test, like forgetting 0, forgetting 1, forgetting negatives or fractions. So these kinds of mistakes, they might seem like little one-off things, but if you start to track it, you might notice, oh, I've actually misread the question a lot of times. And so here's then what I want you to add to your process is don't just tag what you did wrong. Think about what you could fix about your process. Every time there's a mistake, there should be a fix, right? So this might seem totally obvious, but it isn't to a lot of people because this is the number one most common mistake I see is misreading the question. If you notice that that's a mistake that you make a lot, what should you do to fix that? Not a trick question. If you notice that on a lot of word problems, you misread it, miss a key detail, or think it's asking for something that it wasn't asking for, what should you change about your process? Well, I would say for one thing, slow down. Read more carefully. And read more carefully with the pen down. If you're writing while you're reading, that makes it much easier to miss a key piece because your eye is here and then here and then here and then here. So read the whole thing first. Define what it's asking for first. Focus on that question. Yeah, I love that answer. And then jot some things down. Here's another one. Read it through once and then read it backwards. And not literally like each word backwards, but like read the whole thing through and then be like, okay, this is what it's asking for. And then here's one piece of information, here's one piece, and here's the other piece. Read it twice. Measure twice, cut once, right? That's what they say. So every mistake that you make should have a fix. The time that you spend defining that is time really well spent. I can tell you about a colleague of mine who was an LSAT instructor, absolutely brilliant, and was cross-training, studying for the GMAT, and knew the content, knew the math, but was making mistakes and kept getting just under the 760 that we require. And I asked him, like, hey, have you actually been keeping a detailed error log? And he was like, no, I know I tell my students to do that, but I've been lazy and slacking off. And then he started doing it, and he noticed mistakes that were patterns that he hadn't noticed before, took it and got a 770. So there you go. Yeah, this I find is the biggest difference between students who plateau versus students who hit their goal score. And in fact, when students come to me and they say, I'm plateauing at a 650, I don't know how to push ahead to the 700, and I say, okay, show me your review log. The answer is usually, I haven't been keeping one. So this is what the experts do. I promise you that. All right. So I want to do something, I'm going to skip around for a second. I'm going to, skipping around in my notes for a second. So we were talking before about how adaptive testing works. And I'm sure most of you guys know this. I'm sure a lot of you have already taken the GMAT before, or at least taken some practice tests before. So this should look familiar to you, right? How adaptive testing works. The idea is this. You get a question, and if you get it right, it gets harder. If you get it wrong, it gets easier. So every time you get something right, you're getting harder and harder questions, and then you're kind of zeroing in on your theoretical ability level by the end, right? So that's the theory anyway. Oops. And so here, I don't know why I cut off student one and their score. Didn't make it to this slide. But the idea is that regardless of where you end up, so if this student ended up with a 45, but this student ended up with a 32, they're still both missing about half the questions. So it's not about how many questions right and wrong, it's about which ones. You don't want to be getting easier questions wrong. You want to be getting all the easy ones right, and then getting the harder ones. And then if you get some of those, great. If not, that's all right. Oh, I got a great question in the chat about the error log saying, I do keep an error log but tend to make the same mistake or not able to adapt. Any suggestions about how to make that better? So I think it depends on the kind of mistake it is that you're making. So actually, well, tell us, what is the mistake that you've noticed that you've made a lot? I think for some people, if sometimes if you're practicing in a different mode than you're taking the real test, like if when you're practicing, you're like, I'll keep the timer off, I don't worry about it. And then when you take a practice test, you tense up and then you kind of stress yourself out. It can be hard to get in the right frame of mind. So one thing that helps is to, if that's the case, for anyone who thinks that anxiety kind of kicks you back into bad thought patterns, put the timer on whenever you study. Make sure you're practicing under real GMAT-like constraints, and that can make a difference. But other than that, if you find yourself making the same mistake, it's probably because you're going on autopilot. You see a problem and you're like, bam, I'm going to do the algebra. And then you might make the same algebra mistake. I would say in general, the more you step back, put the pen down and frame the problem, and then ask yourself two key questions. One, where do I think they're trying to trick me? And we'll look at some examples of that. Two, what mistakes have I made before on questions like this? What reminders or what mantras do I want to give myself? I'll tell you, for me, the biggest mistake that I make over and over again, and my students catch me making this mistake in classes all the time, is I'll see one number on the board and I'll write a different one down on my paper. No idea. It's the weirdest thing. don't know why my brain does that. Maybe it's because I'm half doing math or only half paying attention. So I have to remind myself, anything you write down that's transcribing, look again, double check that what's on the screen is what's on your paper. And that the only way that I can avoid that mistake is to slow down and to tell myself to take that extra step. So yeah, it completely depends on what the error is. I think a lot of errors can be fixed with just slowing down. So here is sort of the idea of the adaptive testing and how that works. Here's the problem with students who are aiming for top scores a lot of times, is they fight to get the crazy hard questions. And they're doing well, and they're doing well, and they're doing well, and they fight to get those hard questions, and then they run out of time at the end. And at the end, they have to just scramble to click some answers in, and then look where they end up. On the GMAT, it's not about where you were in the middle. It's not about, look at the hard questions I solved. It's about where you end. It's about sticking the landing. So, more than anything else, don't let the timer run out on you. Or it counts everything after that as a wrong answer. And don't get behind time, because then you'll have to scramble and guess at the end. So if you miss a lot at the end, it tanks your score. It's much better to skip, you know, a few questions here in the middle, just like toss a few of these harder ones that you fought for 4 minutes to get right, and then you got them right, but then you messed up your timing. It's better to throw those away in the middle and have time for the gettable ones at the end. So, a big piece of being an expert level GMAT test taker is knowing what to skip or what to guess on as much as what to solve. So that's what I want us to do here together. Do an exercise on how to guess well and what to skip. Before we do that, any questions on how this adaptive testing works or how the timing works? There is a timer on the test, and it will always be counting down from 75, oh, sorry, it used to be 75 minutes. Now it's 65 and 62. But yes, there will be a countdown timer. You're not allowed to bring a watch with you. You're definitely not allowed to bring your own phone with you. That timer will be on screen the whole time. And so someone asked about getting points off, negative markings. So the idea is every time you get one wrong, it drops your ability, like it drops the difficulty level. And so that's where it thinks you are. And then when you get one right, the ability level goes up. There's no such thing as skipping. There's no even option to skip. You can't leave one blank. You have to put in an answer, because otherwise it won't know whether to move you up or down. So in the middle of the test, there is no option to skip. If you are skipping, if you're like, this question's too hard, I don't know what to do, pick your favorite letter, pick B, whatever, and just move on. But what happens is, let's say if you ran out of time completely at this point, the GMAT would basically penalize you for not having answered those questions, and you would just drop all the way down. You wouldn't even have the option to get those couple of guesses right at the end. So it actually hurts you way more to have the timer run out. Even if you were at a high level when the timer ran out, kills your score to have the timer run out on you, because you get an additional penalty for that, for the blanks at the end. So if you see the timer running out, it's better just to randomly click on your favorite letter on every last question at the end. So yeah, let's say you look at the clock and you notice that you only have 5 minutes left, but you have 7 questions left. I would say guess quickly on 5 out of those 7 and pick 2 that seem gettable, and definitely make sure that you enter them in before the timer runs out. Yeah, if you have 2 minutes left for 2 questions, quickly skip the first one, do the last one. Unless that first one seems really doable, do it, but make sure you have 3 seconds to spare to click to the last question. You get the idea. It's really important to practice timing as you go. Yes, so whenever I say skip, I really mean guess a random answer, definitely. So timing, it takes practice. Almost nobody walks into their first practice test and nails the timing. Most people, myself included, on my very first practice test, I got creamed on timing. I absolutely destroyed. And I think I had, yeah, 5 minutes left for the last 10 questions or something like that because I was stubborn. So my first practice test, not so great. And then I had to work on that. Some people do the opposite. They know that timing is a factor, and so they speed through and they finish with 20 minutes to spare. Both of those are problems because if you finish with time to spare, you basically like cheated yourself out of time you could have spent on certain problems. So finding that balance, that Goldilocks, like just right balance, takes practice. And there are definitely strategies. Someone recently did a workshop here just on timing strategies, so you can look that up on YouTube. If you go to the Manhattan Prep blog and type in timing, there are a bunch of articles on how to improve your timing, on how to track your timing. So I won't reiterate that, but do look those up. There's a lot of great info out there. So speaking of timing, let's do this. I'm going to just show you guys a question. And how about this? Let's pretend that this is the end of the test. We've got, I don't know, let's say 4 questions left and 3 minutes. So 4 questions in 3 minutes means we should probably guess on 3 of them and try to commit to 1 of them. If this one pops up, what do you guys think? Should we commit to this one? Should we try to solve it? No. Hot mess. If you see a block of text this big, it's going to be a bigger time commitment. So yeah, this is scary. Skip it for sure. But here's the thing. There's a difference between what I would call like a skip where you're like, no idea, or that looks way too complicated, versus let me take 30 seconds, see if I can come up with a decent guess on this one. So take 30 seconds, think about it. Don't type in the chat window yet. I'll give everyone 30 seconds to think about it and at least come up with a framework for a guess. Go for it. All right. Whether you're committing to a problem or skipping it, there are some things that you want to do with any problem-solving question especially. So one thing that you always want to do is read it fully, pen down. I cannot emphasize that enough. Do not write while you're reading. It is distracting. Think about what it's asking for. And then if you're at the point where you're like, I think I'm going to skip this one, think about, what I was going to say, think about how they're trying to mess with you. Or basically think about what traps they set. So you guys tell me on this one. I think there's a really big trap that the test writer is setting for us here. Did anyone notice the really, really evil thing that they did here? Something about what it's asking for versus what they give us. Yeah. They ask what fraction. And if you kind of stop reading at that point, here's where you're going to answer the wrong question. They're asking what fraction will be unoccupied, but all of the information that they give us is about what's occupied. That's evil, right? That's just so mean. That's like, they're just trying to mess with you. And so this is, all right, on the one hand, it's kind of evil, and you're like, how is this even a math test? This is just, they're just messing with us. On the other hand, that kind of actually makes it a more interesting test from a business school's perspective, because business schools don't care whether you're a genius mathematician. They care, are you a logical thinker? Are you going to carefully read and think about what's being asked? And are you going to check your assumptions? Are you going to answer the question that's really being asked? So, sorry, I feel like I coughed right in the mic. I should have done that. Cold going around. So if they ask us what's unoccupied, but they've given us what's occupied, I want us to think next, if we recognize that there's that trap, and we think a lot of people are going to fall into the trap, they want us to fall into that trap, think about what that means for the answer choices. What do you guys notice about the answer choices? Like, we know that one of these answers is the fraction that's unoccupied, but we suspect strongly that they're going to set a trap answer for what's occupied. What should be true about the occupied versus unoccupied numbers? Yeah, the occupied fraction plus the unoccupied is going to add up to 1. So we want to look for 2 answer choices that add up to 1. So that means we're probably looking at which 2? The only 2 answer choices that add up to 1 here are A and D. That means that it is far more likely for one of those 2 to be right. Trust that you know the test writer, and you know if they set us up for a trap, they're not going to then miss the opportunity to put a trap answer, right? So I like to call these evil twin answer choices, right? One of these is the right answer, the other one is the evil twin of the right answer. So if we're guessing, let's not guess B or C or E. Let's guess one of the 2 that add up to 1. And then all we have to do is ask ourselves, should it be less than half, like A, or should it be more than half, like D, that's unoccupied? No math. You are not allowed to calculate this. Just think conceptually. The occupied portion, we had a third of the smaller wing, and then we got a fifth of the new wing, and then we add this little third of a smaller thing. So does it feel like more than half or less than half is occupied? Gut feeling should probably tell us that that fifth plus just a little third should be less than half. So what fraction is unoccupied? More than half. So let's just pick D. And let's say I trust my intuition that the GMAT's trying to mess with me and that they're going to include a trap. So I'm looking at the pair of answers. I trust my intuition that it's going to be more than half. I should actually, it feels icky to pick an answer that you're not sure of. And you're like, oh, I want to do the math. I want to prove it out. I can feel you itching to want to do that. Resist that urge. It's bad news because you could spend 3-4 minutes solving this problem, or you could spend like 40 seconds being like, ooh, occupied, unoccupied. I'm going to look for a pair of answers. Gut feeling says pick the bigger one. I picked D, which I'm like 90% sure of, in 40 seconds, rather than spending 3 or 4 minutes to be 100% sure. That is the right bet. 80 or 90% sure in under a minute is always better than 100% sure in 3+ minutes. And as it turns out, of course, the right answer here is D. You could solve it. It wouldn't be that bad, but there are some embedded traps in this problem. Train yourself to get good at guessing. Do entire problem sets where you're like, all I'm going to do this time around is just guess. Then tomorrow I'll go back, solve them, and see how often my intuition was right. Not going to work all the time, but it'll work a lot of the time, and you can build that muscle too. All right, let's try another one. Again, no pen and paper. You are not allowed to calculate. All you're allowed to do is read it, think about what it's asking, scan the answers, use common sense, guess an answer. So take 30 seconds. Don't type anything in the chat window yet. Know what not to solve. Yeah, go for it. All right, that's it. That's all the time you get. I'm sure some of you are itching to solve this. It's one of those, those evil machines making widgets problems. But let's not calculate. How about this? Everyone type in, knowing that no one has solved and no one knows for sure what the right answer is, I want you guys all to type in what you would guess in the chat. 1, 2, 3, go. Let's see what people are going to guess on this one. Just gun to your head. Your favorite letter on this one. Nobody's judging you and no one's holding you to it. All right, seeing a lot of different answers, a lot of different things coming in. Here's what I would say when you are guessing. If you're guessing on a multiple choice question, I would always recommend not guessing numbers that are in the problem. So if 6, 8, or 10 were in here or something like that, that would obviously be way too easy, or any kind of one move answer would be way too easy. Do you guys notice anything about the answer choices? Any patterns or things that strike you? in terms of the evil twins idea that we were talking about earlier? Because I'm noticing this. 2 over 9 and 9 over 2, and then 20 over 27 and 27 over 20. Got two sets of reciprocals. That means, you know what? Don't guess B. Just in terms of probability, if there are two sets of pairs, the answer is very, very unlikely to be an outlier, to be the one outlier. I'm not saying it couldn't be. Obviously it could. They could write a problem specifically that way, but I really doubt that you would see that. If you're guessing, don't guess the outlier. So now we have a threshold question. I'm going to split it like this. What's true about What's true about A and C versus what's true about D and E? Why divide it into these two groups? We're thinking about what should be bigger, the numerator or the denominator. A and C are less than 1, in other words, smaller numerator. D and E greater than 1, larger numerator. So it has to do with, yeah, machine A working by itself versus B and C working together. So machine A is faster by itself than either of the other two by themselves, but is it going to be faster than the other two working together? Usually two machines working together are faster, right, than a machine working by itself. Stands to reason, right? Two things, do it faster than one thing. But here's the thing that we really want to pay attention to. On questions like this in particular, you need to be sure that you answer the right question. The ratio that we're looking for is not a ratio of their speeds. It's a ratio of the time that it takes machine A versus the time that it takes machine B and C. So we're looking for A's time over B and C's time. This is the fraction that we're looking for. Ugh. Not a very straight fraction line there. So what do you guys think? Should the numerator be greater or should the denominator be greater? Who's taking more time? The greater amount of time would be the slower one. So A takes more time because it's going slower. B and C take less time working together because they're going faster collectively. So that means we want a bigger numerator, something greater than 1, eliminate A and C. Now when we're looking at D and E, 27 over 20, that's like greater than 1 but less than 2, right? 9 over 2 as a ratio is more than 4 to 1. Is A going to take more than 4 times as much time as B and C together? A took 6 minutes by itself. A was the fastest by itself. B and C, when they work together, are going to be a little bit faster, but A is not going to then be like taking 4 times as long. So E doesn't make logical sense. It has to be D because we've ruled everything else out. Here is a case where not only, it's not just that we're guessing that it's D, logically D is the only answer that makes any sense. And we did it without doing a rate chart or complicated computation here with this rate problem, just by defining who's going faster, what's the question asking for. That's it. That's all we needed. Questions on that? You can take a screenshot and figure out how to actually do the math and solve it later if you want. I do recommend doing that as part of your review process to confirm that you know how to set up algebra, how to set up rate charts, all of that. But you always want to be asking yourself, what's the most efficient way? How far can I take myself with just estimating, just eliminating illogical answers? Am I treating the answer choices as part of the problem itself? That's what the expert level GMAT test taker does. All right, let me show you one more. All right. We'll skip past that one for a second. Read this one. All right. Here's your takeaway for this problem. Skip it entirely. Everyone should skip this problem. This is a ridiculous problem. I think even the effort that it would take to come up with a decent guess on this problem is too much. As soon as I realize that I can't even accurately picture it, I'm like, okay, this car is going this way, and then this car starts going this way at a different time, and where are they on the track? And it's asking for how many hours, and then hours is given in terms of pi. Nope, I'm done. If I look up at the clock and I see time on the clock, I'll try to come up with a reasonable guess based on an estimate of pi. Otherwise, I'm like, you know what? This looks like an 800 level question. Too many moving pieces, too hard to estimate, too many things that could go wrong. I bet that this is a crazy, scary, hard problem, so getting it wrong doesn't hurt my score. Spending 4.5 minutes on it definitely hurts my score. I'm going to skip it. Not even going to attempt it. You need to skip problems on the quant unless you are consistently ahead of time. There is no way. Basically, until you are consistently at a 49 or 50 and desperately want to get to a 51, then you can start doing every problem. Up to a 50, people who get 50s still skip a lot of problems on the quant side. People who get 730s overall focus a lot of time on quant and verbal and review deeply. So, one more thing that I want to say. It has been a pleasure to have you guys here. I want you to know that you can always try a live GMAT class for free. Basically, we want you to see if you would love a Manhattan Prep class. So every in-person class and every online class, we offer the first session absolutely for free, and we would love to have you come sit in. You can also test out our interactive course, GMAT Interact. It's interactive self-study. And we have tons of resources. So we offer these free prep hours every 2 weeks. We have recordings for all of the other ones. If you go to the Manhattan Prep website and look for free resources, you can see our YouTube channel that has tons of these. And check out our blog. There are lots of articles. I wrote a bunch of articles because we really want to make sure that you guys have everything you need to do well on this test, because it's not a test of, are you a brilliant mathematician? It's a test of, are you playing the right game? And you need to know the rules of the game that you're playing. And you need to know when it's not worth it, guess and move on. So thank you all so much for coming. I hope to see you at the next one. Have a good night and stay warm. Bye-bye.